Okay, so in this video, I want to take a look at another example when we interpret what the type 1 and type 2 errors are in a certain context, and then we can consider what are the ramifications of making these errors in this context. So the example here we want to consider is, let's say a hospital is testing to see whether a donated organ is a match for a recipient that is in need of an organ transplant. And so the boring, non-interesting claim that we might assume is that the organ is not a match for the recipient. And the interesting thing, which we would hope to show, is that the organ donor actually is a match for the recipient. And a type 1 error, if we think about this one first, again, this is the case when we falsely reject HO when it's true. So in other words here, we're going to reject this, which therefore means we're going to say that the organ is a match when in fact it is not a match. So that would be the error that's being made in this case. So we're going to say right? So if we were to reject HO, that's equivalent to saying the organ is a match, since that's the converse of that statement, when in fact it is not. And the type 2 error, this in general is when we fail to reject the null hypothesis when the null hypothesis is actually true, or actually not true. So in this case, that would mean that we fail to reject the claim that it is not a match when in fact it is a match, when we should have rejected it. Okay, so let's consider in the context here what might happen if we were to make these mistakes. So again, I'm not saying that either one of these errors is fine. These are, we don't want to make errors. But if we consider the two types of errors here, if we say that the organ is a match when in fact it's not a match, this is extremely bad situation. Okay, the organ recipient, their body is going to reject the organ, so they might potentially die. And on top of that, someone that could have used that organ didn't receive it. So this is something that's extremely bad, and we want to really try and avoid this at all costs if we can. The type 2 error, this would be the situation where we have falsely told someone, we're sorry, that organ donor was not a match for you, when in fact it was a match. And again, it's not great, but at least worst case scenario is that the recipient has to wait a little bit longer to get that organ that match when they didn't have to. So this is, not ideal, but it's not a catastrophe either, at least in most situations. So we're generalizing these things here. But this is different than the previous case with the medical screening tests, in the sense that making a type 1 error here is going to be much worse situation than if we were to make a type 2 error. So when we design our test, we might want to set it up so that it makes it really difficult to make a type 1 error.